Hello, DCU fans! Today is going to be my Superman movie breakdown, including Easter eggs, endings explained, post-credit scenes, and more. So obviously there will be spoilers for the movie, but as long as you're okay with that, then let's dive right in and see what we can find out. Don't forget we have a July contest running all month long. Be a subscriber, leave a comment. You could win a book or a steelbook. Best of luck. And we have a membership option with lots of cool perks, so you might check it out in case you're interested. And hang around to the end of the video, and we'll get into the Doomsday Countdown watch on the Discord. Alright, so if you watched any of my trailer videos, you know I broke the movie down into 8 key scene groupings, and I was pretty happy with how accurate this ended up being. But let's talk overall about the timeline. I did a separate video on the timeline, so you can check that out if you want more details, but at the beginning of the movie, they tell us 3 centuries ago, the first superpowered beings, known as metahumans, appeared on Earth, ushering in a new era of gods and monsters. And Gods and Monsters is indeed the first chapter of Gunn's DCU. So, to summarize the rest of the graphics, 3 decades ago, Kal-El crashes on Earth. 3 years ago, Superman makes his debut. 3 weeks ago, Superman stopped an invasion. 3 hours ago, the Hammer of Boravia attacked Superman. And 3 minutes ago, Superman lost his first battle. And actually, we can add to the list, 3 months ago, Lois and Clark started dating. So yeah, lots of threes. I thought this was a really cool way for Gunn to bring us up to speed on what's happening in the DCU. In fact, let's look at the timeline briefly. So we get these newspapers basically right in our faces at several points in the movie that align to May in calendar year 2025. So here we have Monday, and then we see Hot Girl reading a newspaper that has Thursday, and at the end of the movie, we also have Saturday. So basically, the newspapers go from Monday to Saturday, and if you consider the fact that the first newspaper, the one on Monday, is reporting the story that happened on Sunday with Superman getting his butt kicked, then that means we go from Sunday to Saturday, a full week. Very cool. Also, even the numbers in the newspaper go up correctly because Mondays is 60,002, Thursdays ends with a 5, and Saturdays ends with a 7. Absolutely love it. All right, so let's talk about the Daily Planet crew. Obviously, we have Lois Lane, wouldn't be a movie without her. Jimmy Olsen has quite an interesting role in the movie. And then we have Kat and Steve and Ron, and tucked away in the back are Superman co-creator Jerry Siegel's grandchildren. I thought that was really cool that Gunn included them. And of course, we have Perry White. All right, so now let's talk about each of these scene groupings. So we don't learn too much about the initial conflict in Boravia, other than the newspaper does tell us that Boravia has been the source of numerous headlines worldwide in recent weeks as it invaded neighboring country Jarhanpur, only for the brief war to be swiftly ended by Superman. And of course, we've heard mention of Jarhanpur in Creature Commandos when Frankenstein is asked about Rick Flag, and he says he and I fought together in Jarhanpur several moons ago. And we get this news story about the Boravian troops amassing at the border. It's also worth noting this TV was manufactured by Luthor, dude is everywhere, and notice the story is from GBS News, and we've seen them as recently as Creature Commandos. All right, so we actually don't see any of the initial battle with the hammer. However, we do see the aftermath in the section I'm calling home, because we see Superman, who is severely beaten. He's basically falling out of the sky, lands in the snow, and he is bleeding out. Yuck. All right, so he whistles and he gets his wish. Krypto comes running, but maybe he wishes he hadn't called for Krypto because Krypto jumps up and down on him, causing him even more pain. Anyway, he then utters the word home and then says, "Take me home." So like a good boy, Krypto grabs his cape and slowly pulls him towards the Fortress of Solitude as it rises out of the snow. Now, it initially looked to me like Krypto's bark opened the door, but actually it's Superman's DNA, which is something that Lex Luthor is going to use to his advantage later in the movie. And then the Superman robots come in to help, and in fact they're voiced by several familiar faces. Alan Tudyk, Mantis and Yondu, and Jennifer Holland, James Gunn's wife, even voices one of the characters at the end of the movie. All right, so then we hear a message playing from Superman's parents, and in fact, Bradley Cooper himself is voicing Jor-El, and the message is very peaceful about how Superman has come to Earth to try to help others. But we're going to see there's more to that message later in the movie. All right, so it turns out an extra dose of sun is just what the doctor ordered because they reveal that he has 14 fractured bones, damage to the bladder, kidney, large intestine, and lungs. So he needs a healthy dose of yellow sun, and they're going to have him up and at him in no time. And in fact, they magnify it. I love that. That's so cool. And he screams. The pain is really because his bones are being reknit and his organs are being fixed. All right, so he gets up, and then number 4 says, "Sir, you're only 83% restored to health. You must rest." He says, "No can do, got to get back in the fray," but he's told the hammer fella just beat you at full power. So that's a good point. He's actually weaker than he was in the first fight. But anyway, as he starts to leave, he stops and says, "Wait, what is this?" Crypto, what the hey, dude? You destroyed the whole place. And indeed, Crypto is a very, very bad dog. Because then when Superman tries to leave, he bites at him, won't let him leave, and he's like, sit, stay. So Crypto was an MVP in this movie, for sure. All right, so finally, he's ready to head back for round 2. And I'll be honest, I was so thrown off with this hands behind him while he's flying, because I'm so used to Superman flying with his hands out. But you know, by the end of the movie, I actually preferred it with his hands behind him. In fact, James Gunn was probably testing this idea out with Warlock in Guardians 3. So very, very cool. Anyway, Superman is ticked off, and he's heading back for round 2. Meanwhile, we see that the engineer is looking around trying to find the fortress, which has now gone back into the snow. But at least Lex knows where it is, and we'll see him using that to his advantage later. All right, so the Hammer continues his attack, says your Superman has abandoned you. The people of Boravia will not ignore him, inserting himself into our affairs. And to show his great strength, he blasts this building. Yikes. And notice inside the building, you can see these boards. Well, here's a close-up, and yes, they are indeed Choco cookies. That is crazy. And the newspaper article tells us that damages included an ocular laser strike on the well-known Choco's building. Luckily, no employees were injured, says the Choco spokeswoman, and this will not affect the production of our beloved Choco cookies. And of course, that's going to make Martian Manhunter very, very happy, because we all know he loves his Chocos. So while the Hammer is blasting the building, we also see that Miss Tessmacher is taking selfies. And in fact, the selfies become very important in the movie, as we'll see later on. Plus, Miss Tessmacher is a throwback to the first Superman movie, where we also had that character. And speaking of her, we also find Otis is in the movie, and of course, he's a throwback to that original movie as well. All right, so Superman wants revenge, right? Here we see him flying in. Lex turns and says he's back. So the Hammer is ready for round 2. But what we learn is that Lex has studied Superman for years, he says, and in fact, now knows all the best fighting moves to take him down. So he's basically controlling the Hammer, calling out 12C, 18A, etc. So in a way, Lex is really the one fighting Superman, making him feel all the more superior. So then how is Lex doing this? That's because he's getting a bird's eye view of the battle using his drones. Then this one had to hurt. The Hammer reels back and punches Superman so hard that he falls all the way to the ground. Miss Tessmacher gets another selfie as he goes down, and he smashes into the pavement. Yikes. So then this dude is actually very important to the movie. We're going to see him reappear later, but for now, he's just going down to help Superman because he says, you've saved me many times over the years, and I just want to return the favor, basically. But when Superman looks up, the Hammer is taken off. And honestly, I do wonder why he didn't chase after the Hammer, but maybe again he's too weak to do it because he got the stuffings beat out of him again. Anyway, the Hammer flies all the way to this base, walks behind these curtains, and enters a portal. And that portal actually turns out to lead him back to Luthor, because you can see Otis there on the left. But also we get, honestly, the least surprising reveal ever, right? The Hammer is actually Ultraman. And in fact, anybody that collected Funkos realized that a while ago because notice the number for both the Hammer of Boravia and DC's Ultraman was 583. I mean, the Funkos were giving away the fact that clearly it was Ultraman under that armor. But I think we all guessed it, right? Anyway, still cool. But now, that means that this shot right here actually had all the villains in it. Because on the rooftop, we see the engineer. Of course, this is what she looked like in the comics, fully nanotech, really cool. But also, here, if we zoom in, it's impossible to see. I know, it's so blurry. But literally, the Hammer of Boravia is standing there talking to Lex. So yeah, who knew that the very first trailer had all the main villains hanging out? And then we see that President Gurkos, the president of Boravia, is denying any involvement. Yeah, right, dude, right. Anyway, that's the home scene. Now we move on to the interview. So we start this day at the Daily Planet as Clark is walking to work. Notice there's his newspaper where he's written the story about the Hammer of Boravia the day before. As he walks in the building, we see that everyone's reading the paper, right? I mean, the place looks amazing. He runs across Jimmy Olsen. There's the newspaper again, and the two of them are clowning around. All right, so this is interesting. Throughout the movie, we get several warnings about weather conditions. This story is talking about extreme weather. Then during the Kaiju fight, notice major floods causing suffering. There's a newspaper story mentioning more than 50 tornadoes confirmed during a recent outbreak. And there's another story talking about climate change impacts detailed at the Science Center. So anyway, let me know your thoughts if you think this is going to come up again later in the future. All right, so we see that Lois is really into Clark, and we're going to have a big-time interview between them in a moment. But first, Lex wants to approach the government to have Superman locked up. He says, Ultraman, the engineer, and my Raptors are an unstoppable force we call Planet Watch. Kind of a goofy name, but it's his way of saying we're going to watch over not just the area, but the whole planet. Anyway, they say to him, well, as far as we can ascertain, there's no kryptonite left on the planet. All right, so there's a novel called Superman, Welcome to Metropolis, and I've done a video on that if you want detailed information on it, but it happens 3 years before the Superman movie itself. And in this novel, we learn that Lex Luthor has gotten a hold of an ore, or a mineral, that is extremely rare and previously unknown to science, and he uses it to power Metallo. Sure enough, the ore is a source of tremendous power that we haven't known before, and it makes Metallo really strong, able to take on Superman. But more importantly, it also weakens Superman. So Lex is like, I was particularly intrigued by Superman's reaction to Metallo's new power source, the Rock. So isn't that interesting? Assuming this novel is canon to the DCU, Lex Luthor had access to kryptonite 3 years before this movie and somehow lost it, or maybe someone stole it. We'll have to wait and see if we learn more. All right, so Lex has to convince everyone, including Rick Flag Sr., that this is a good idea to lock up Superman. Because they say, hey, without proof of his malicious intent, it is not worth the risk. So yeah, Lex now has to prove that Superman is a threat. And of course, we saw Rick Flag Sr. in Creature Commandos. He had white hair in that case, so we'll have to wait and see what color his hair will be when he shows up again in Peacemaker. And let's give a quick shout out to director Florence Crawley, who showed up in this scene. You might remember her when she showed up in the Suicide Squad and whacked Amanda Waller on her head when Waller went nutso. So very cool. All right, so now let's move to the interview scene. So things start out with a romantic kiss, and then Lois comments saying, eventually people are going to figure out that you're Superman. And he says, well, but the glasses. Which is kind of funny, because in the comics, it took Lois 662 issues to figure out Clark Kent and Superman were one and the same. But we're going to find out there's a little more going on with the glasses later in the movie. So she says, you'd let me interview you as Superman? And he's like, yeah, sure. So then she immediately puts them on the record, and notice, Lord Tech produced this recorder, so between Lord Tech and Luthor Corps, they're everywhere. So she says, ready? And he says, let's do it, Cronkite, referring to famous news broadcaster Walter Cronkite. So she says, Superman? And he says, Miss Lane? You've recently come under a lot of fire. Today, the Secretary of Defense said he's going to look into your actions. My actions, he says, I stopped a war. She's like, well, in effect, you illegally entered a country. This is how you're going to be, he says? Well, I'm not the one being interviewed, Superman. Did you consult the president? He's like, no. You seemingly act as a representative of the United States. I wasn't representing anybody except for me. Well, I would question myself in the same situation and consider the consequences. And he's like, people were going to die. So I love this back and forth. This was a really good segment in the movie and really lets us wrestle with the question of whether or not he should have intervened in that war. Anyway, he then explains, I was sent here to serve humanity and to help the world be a better place. And he's saying that because of the message he received from his parents. Remember the message that was damaged, and thus he has not heard it in its entirety. But the evening ends poorly with Lois saying, I'm not even sure this is going to work out. But speaking of not working out, while this interview is going on, Otis is releasing a baby kaiju into the city, which is going to soon grow into, well, a monstrous kaiju and go on the attack. So the reason Lex unleashes that kaiju on Metropolis is he and his posse are heading over to the fortress. And actually, my son observed that there's no way Lex could have walked out in the extreme cold with his head uncovered like that. He would have been frozen immediately. But maybe the dude has a really, really good heating unit inside that outfit. Anyway, they head over to the Fortress of Solitude, and sure enough, this was our big hint that Ultraman, there on the right, is a clone of Superman because his DNA is what opened that door. So what's interesting about Ultraman in the movie is he's not exactly like Ultraman in the comics, and he's not exactly like Bizarro either. He's just a clone. But I do wonder if he might return again later as Bizarro. We'll talk more about that at the end. Okay, so the engineer is now on the attack. We see Superman's robots there, and she just lights them up with her nanotech, just slicing them in half, crushing them. Lex is just walking across the room as she hurls her blades and crushes another one there. He doesn't even blink, right? But it's actually Crypto that strikes back. He jumps at the engineer, claws at her face, and actually rips some of the nanobites off. That's pretty crazy. But she gets Crypto back basically by knocking him out and smothering him with her nanobites. All right, so then Lex is like Superman. He's not a man, he's an it. So he wants to know Superman's secrets. And sure enough, he uses the engineer to tap into the equipment and to decode the rest of the message. So it turns out the beginning of the message from Superman's parents is peaceful. But we'll find out the rest of the message definitely is not. All right, so meanwhile, the reason Superman doesn't know what's going on at the fortress is he's too busy saving people, including this crazy dog that won't leave. He's like, get out of here. So finally he blows the dog to safety. I absolutely love that. All right, so now he's going to try a knockout punch on the Kaiju, flies right at it, ready to punch it in the face. But first, I got to mention this. This is really interesting. New regulations set to begin next week. So, in a newspaper article, we learn lots of details. So, the destruction of public property due to the actions of superpowered individuals and extraterrestrials has become a contentious topic of discussion in local government. Many believe the recent tax hike is a consequence of the rise in super people acting outside the law. The recent tax hike was only to support our ever-growing population, claims a representative from the Metropolis capital. Our latest project is to restore reported condemned housing and recodify them to modern standards. And they even mention New Troy Island, Baker Line, where Lois is from, and Queenland Park. All right, that's fascinating. So people are getting taxed extra money because of all this damage. Anyway, back to Superman trying to deck this dude, but it turns out it barely phases him. So he blasts Superman once again. I love this special effect. It looks really, really cool of him flying around. He gets torched, and then he actually takes off into the sky, waits for a minute, and then comes back down trying a cannonball move. I love it. In fact, the crowd loves it, right? But it still doesn't stop that thing. So that means now he has to save even more people. So he swoops in to save this lady. Gotta mention the Big Belly Burger advertisement. Love it. Anyway, he swoops in, grabs her, and sets her gently down on this rooftop and gives her a nice smile. Then we get this shot from the early trailers. I love this scene where he protects this little girl, keeps her neck safe while all the carnage is flying around her. So cool. So then the Kaiju does its best flame-on impersonation, torching both Superman and torching the building. So Superman looks at it and says, hey buddy, eyes up here. And he's doing that to get it away from the building, basically. So he flies up, and now we see the building is indeed Lord Tech, because you can see the logo and the name. So Lord Tech is obviously owned by Maxwell Lord, who is ultimately played by Sean Gunn, although we don't see him until the very end of the movie. But he will be showing up in Peacemaker Season 2. So, Maxwell Lord has the Justice Gang on the payroll, which you can obviously tell that because the Maxwell Lord logo is on all their suits. And one of the things I loved about Guy Gardner is he's continuing the tradition of terrible haircuts. Not quite the bowl cut from the comics, but still an awful haircut nonetheless. But what wasn't awful was Mr. Terrific. Dude lived up to his name. He was awesome. And in fact, looked exactly like he did from the comics. And he stole so many scenes in the movie. And I'm so happy for the actor because, man, was he treated terribly in X-Men First Class when his character Darwin was killed off so quickly. And I am excited to see the Justice Gang will be returning in Peacemaker Season 2 along with Maxwell Lord. Now, when the Justice Gang shows up, we get this newscast telling us corporate metahumans on scene. And that really shows us the difference between the Justice Gang and Superman. They're paid to do what they do, and he does it because it's the right thing to do. But this newscaster, it's worth pointing out, is Christopher Reeve's son, who IRL is also a newscaster. So it was just perfect. Just perfect. And while all this is going on, Kat is asking Lois about her boyfriend. She says, how's it going with that guy you were seeing? You were saying you weren't sure about him? And Lois is like, he's, well, strange. And then in the trailers, they had Kat go, oh, I like strange. I'm kind of glad they cut that because that was kind of creepy, Kat. That was a little creepy. But anyway, if she looks familiar, you've seen her in all of the Guardians movies, including the very first Guardians movie when she was helping Nova Prime. Okay, so the Justice Gang are actually the ones that take the Kaiju down because Hawkgirl comes flying in with her mace and starts beating on its eyeball. Oh man, that was hard to watch. Then Guy Gardner muzzles it, and then Mr. Terrific finally kills it by exploding it from inside. And Superman is not happy about that. He wanted to find a way to keep it alive, and that really, again, shows the difference between the Justice Gang and how they treat life versus Superman. And speaking of the Justice Gang, Guy Gardner keeps pushing that name, saying, hey, we're the Justice Gang. Hawkgirl's like, just a working name. And he's like, but it may turn out to be permanent, though. So it's just a running joke that he really, really wants to use that name, and everybody else hates it. So they're all celebrating the victory. Superman's picking up that sweet little girl. Everybody's gathering around and cheering when suddenly Lex Luthor drops a bomb. He tells everyone that Superman is sent on a mission to destroy us. He basically has translated the rest of the message from Superman's parents, which includes bombshells like this. Do us proud, our beloved son. Rule without mercy. Oh my word. So let me know your thoughts on this. I wondered for a while, did Lex at least alter it somewhat? Did he change things around in any way, shape, or form? I don't think so. I think the message of the movie was Superman has awful parents. So definitely let me know your thoughts on that. Anyway, the crowd turns against Superman. They're throwing stuff at him, yelling at him. He heads in the building, and he's basically having an existential crisis, trying to figure out, who really am I? So while he's doing that, though, we get this interesting Easter egg for Stag Industries. Now, we don't see any more references to Stag in the movie, but of course, Stag is responsible for creating Metamorpho in the comics. What is interesting, though, is in the book, Welcome to Metropolis, they mention that there is Luthor Corp, Lord Tech, and Stag Industries. Those are the big corporations. But they say that Stag Industries is located in D.C., so I don't know if this is maybe just one of his many buildings or what's going on with that, or maybe this is just something that's not correct from the book. So we'll have to wait and see. Anyway, Guy is starting to get suspicious about Superman's intent. Sure, he helps by making sure that no one can get in the building and that they can't even see what's happening, but then he goes to confront Superman and says, if any of the message is true, you are exactly the type of alien threat that I am here to protect against. Wow, that is a throwdown. So Superman's like, back off, Guy. And he's like, oh, make a move, Big Blue. Make a move. So I wonder if this is going to play out in the future, because Superman and Guy Gardner would make a very interesting throwdown fight if it ever were to happen. So while all of this is happening, Gurkos, Boravia's leader, is back home celebrating. He is loving it because, of course, he hates Superman for getting involved in his conflict with Jor-Han-Pur. And then we see, as he clicks this little button, that he has his own portal, his own access point to reach Lex Luthor, because they are working together. Oh my, oh my. Meanwhile, Superman has headed back to the fortress and seen all the damage that Lex has caused, but most importantly, he realizes Lex has stolen Krypto. So man, it is time for a confrontation. He is so ticked off, he heads in to see Luthor, who says, Superman, we finally meet. Would you like a coffee? So I found that really interesting. That means this is the first time that Superman and Lex have directly met, even though Superman has been in Metropolis for 3 solid years. That is crazy, right? So then Superman is like, where is the dog? And Lex is like, Miss Tessmacher, get all this on film. Get it on film. So Superman stands over Lex, just ready to sock him, right? Notice Lex reaches his hand forward to get his coffee mug, while Superman grabs the desk and throws it against the wall. And look at Lex, still standing there with his coffee with that totally punchable face. Oh my word. And then he mumbles as he takes a sip of coffee and goes, ugly dog in a cape. Superman's literally ready to lose it. But this is interesting. In one of the trailers, notice there's nothing at the bottom of the mug, but in the actual movie then, we see Space Lex on the mug. So I don't know if they wanted to keep it a secret until the movie itself, but either way, it's a clever parody of Elon Musk's SpaceX. But by far the biggest reaction in my theater was the epic cameo by Peacemaker. So let me know if people went crazy in your theater, but people went nuts. And of course, he was brought on to give conspiracy theories about Superman, because we all know how he loves his conspiracy theories. So anyway, that night, Lois and Clark are trying to unpack everything that's happened. She's like, you have a dog? And he's like, well, not really. It's more of a foster situation. And we'll find out who owns the dog at the end of the movie, obviously. But then she says, you were out there helping them, referring to the chaos happening outside the window. And he says, no, that's some dimensional imp. They've got that handled. I was looking for the dog. So I was really surprised he called it a dimensional imp, because I would have bet good money that was going to be Solaris. But instead, is it Mr. Mixelplick? I don't know. I don't know what it's supposed to be. Let me know your thoughts if you have any idea. I hope we find out at some point what that was meant to be. But anyway, they're totally ignoring all that craziness outside the window, and Lois is saying how she doesn't believe any of those negative stories about him, but Clark is saying, I'm going to need to go and rescue Krypto, so I'm going to turn myself in. And that then leads to his arrest. And even though he's going in willingly, they're still jerks about it and slam his face in the pavement as they cart him off, the engineer, Ultraman, and of course, Rick Flag Sr. And he is then taken into Luthor's prison, where he says, your obsession with me is getting a little creepy. But Lex is like, don't worry, tall, dark, and Martian isn't my type. Then he waves his finger, and they cart Superman off in a prison cell. Now, Luthor then explains his pocket universe. He says, I replicated the Big Bang using the Luthor Core Mega Collider, tearing a tiny hole between 2 universal fabrics. Oh my word, That was a mouthful, right? But yeah, he seems to have created this pocket universe, but I still think it's connected to the quantum unfolding storage area that we saw in Peacemaker Season 1, because we are going to see it again in Peacemaker Season 2. So I'm really curious to see how this all comes together. So anyway, we then see that there are multiple monkeys sitting at the keyboards typing away, and that's never a good thing, right? Because they are putting out on social media only an idiot would still back Superman and all kinds of other negative things. So I thought this was pretty clever commentary by Gunn on social media and how some of the trolls try to use it. Anyway, we also see that Crypto is being distracted by chasing phantom squirrels. Too funny. Every dog loves the squirrels. And we also meet Metamorpho. Of course, this is what he looked like in the comics. He can change into any element. Apparently, that also includes kryptonite, right? Because that is a kryptonite hand he's got right there, and he's using it to weaken Superman. Now, I had assumed that this was probably Metamorpho's wife, who we see from the comics, and that Lex was holding her hostage to force him to do his bidding. Actually, it just turns out this is one of Lex's ex-girlfriends. In fact, Lex has all kinds of prisoners here. It's basically like his own personal Guantanamo Bay where he can torture anyone he wants. So I was at least happy that I guessed that baby Joey, Metamorpho's baby, would be part of the reason he was being forced to do Lex's bidding. Because here we see him just shoving that kryptonite hand in Superman's face. Man, that's painful. And then he gets a beat down from Lex's Raptors. You can actually see the LC there on their outfit. They are just crushing him. So Superman spends at least a night there in prison, and now it's time for the escape. So, lots of moving parts here. First of all, we have Lois heading to the Justice Gang's headquarters, which is called the Hall of Justice and patterned exactly from the Super Friends cartoon. I love that so much. And then we also see on the wall, there's a Justice Society mural. In fact, here's more of it you can see here. So I can't wait to try to identify all these different heroes when the movie hits digital, because this is going to be so much fun. So anyway, Lois is seeking help from the Justice Gang to rescue Superman, but all Guy cares about is, do you know about the hypno glasses? And Hot Girl's like, well, she does now. So we learn that Clark is actually wearing hypnotic glasses to make sure that people don't realize that he's actually Superman. That is too funny. But anyway, Lois is like, look, what are we going to do about Superman? And we learn that Mr. Terrific actually put nanobite GPS trackers in his bloodstream. So he knows that Superman really must be in a pocket universe because he's no longer on the Earth. But Guy Gardner gives the bad news. He says, I'm a Green Lantern lady. That means I took a vow not to get involved in politics. And she comes back with one of the best lines of the movie, that haircut should be against your vows. And he's like, that what should be what? Well, the bottom line is, Guy Gardner and Hawk Girl are not going to help. But Mr. Terrific does decide to help. And we get this hilarious scene where he may have all this great tech, but his garage door opens really, really slowly. Okay, so while all that is going on, Lex is now threatening to kill one of Superman's friends. He's basically holding him at gunpoint unless Superman tells Lex everything about his origin, who his earthly parents are, etc., etc. And in fact, this is that guy from the beginning of the movie who helped rescue him when he got socked by the hammer of Boravia. But it is so tragic because Lex kills him. He's playing Russian roulette, and sure enough, boom, the dude's dead. So Lex then threatens to find even more of Superman's friends and kill them one at a time unless Superman tells him what he wants to know. Goodness gracious. So now we head back to Mr. Terrific and Lois, and they have tracked Superman to his last location. It's the same place where the hammer of Boravia went into that portal earlier in the movie. So now we get one of the best action scenes of the movie as Mr. Terrific obliterates these dudes. So they're basically the same Raptors that we saw in the prison cell, and unfortunately, we never see Lex get in one of the suits. So hopefully, on Lex's next appearance, he'll be armored up. Anyway, this action scene was so good. Let me know if it was your favorite action scene of the movie. Anyway, they have now found the portal that leads into Lex's prison, but understandably, they're a little nervous about entering. Meanwhile, Metamorpho has finally got a conscience because he couldn't believe Lex killed that guy in cold blood, so he turns his fingers into basically the sun so that he's able to heal Superman. And I will say, though, that lady on the right, she would be blind at this point if she was looking at effectively the sun. So I hope she's closing her eyes. So that allows Superman to be able to escape from his prison cell and to hold up his end of the bargain with Metamorpho as he goes to rescue baby Joey. But Metamorpho soon is confronted by some Raptors, and the coolest thing is, one of those Raptors is voiced by Michael Rosenbaum himself. That is epic. Way to go, Gunn. Way to go. So then Superman takes a bath in an anti-proton river, and they're all almost sucked into a black hole until Superman manages to help them escape. Crazy, crazy scene. Visually stunning, but absolutely crazy. So then, because of all the kryptonite poisoning he endured, Clark is taken home for some parental TLC, and you can actually see his veins are just bursting because of that poisoning. So poor Lois is just looking on in dismay at the pain he's had to endure. Then we see him waking up with Krypto sitting on his belly. Good old Krypto. Maybe Krypto is a good dog. And then we see on the wall a poster for the Mighty Crabjoys. So Clark had mentioned earlier that he's punk rock because he likes groups like the Mighty Crabjoys. But this is actually a fake group that James Gunn created, yet nonetheless, notice they're actually in the soundtrack. They have a song in the soundtrack for the movie. We also saw Frankenstein wearing a Mighty Crabjoy shirt during Creature Commandos, and it looks like they're getting a shout out during Peacemaker Season 2. So, too funny, too funny. And then Clark gets a very important pep talk from Pa Kent. He explains your actions. That's what makes you who you are. So it doesn't matter that Jor-El said, come and rule the world, and that basically you have terrible genes from your parents. You determine who you are. You set the course for your life. Fantastic message. And Clark hears it, understands it, and gives him a big hug. I love it. All right, so now we move to the final boss battle. So Lex draws Superman out by creating yet another crisis. This time, he creates this giant rift which starts to rip Metropolis apart. Oh my word. So they declare an evacuation order, and honestly, I have no idea how these people all got out in time, but I love the Gotham City Easter egg. So man, this gets me all the more excited at the idea of seeing Superman and Batman together in the new DCU. Cannot wait, cannot wait. Okay, so I love it. Ma Kent says, I cleaned your boots. I'll go get them for you. And he is ready to go kick some butt. All right, so now let's talk about what the Daily Planet crew has been up to. So Lois is saying, buckle up, and they're taking off in Mr. Terrific's ship. But notice, they have figured out everything Lex has been up to. And the key to figuring it all out was Miss Tessmacher, because she has actually been texting her selfies to Jimmy Olsen. She's in love with Jimmy, basically. And those selfies have information in the background that revealed Lex's plans. Although I will say I wasn't real happy with how Jimmy treated her. I mean, naming her mutant toes in his contacts? Come on, Jimmy. Come on, bro. But it was kind of fun to see Miss Tessmacher being the one to take down Lex Luthor, which was very similar to the first Superman movie back in the 70s. In fact, speaking of that movie, Luthor's plan in this movie was to split Jarhanpur into New Boravia and Luthoria. Well, that's a total homage back to the original Superman movie, where Lex was going to split the San Andreas Fault and then create all these new towns. And of course, Otis had Otisburg. That was one of my favorite parts of that movie, for sure. Too funny. Anyway, Lois now takes off with the Daily Planet crew, and they're going to tell everyone about Lex's dirty deeds. And while all that is going on, we also have the conflict between Boravia and Jarhanpur starting back up again, and this poor little kid calling for Superman. In fact, getting everyone to chant, Superman, Superman. I mean, they sure need Superman, because it's tanks versus a bunch of dudes with sticks. Well, they don't get Superman, but maybe they get something just as good. I love how Guy Gardner just swipes away the tank, boom, and then flips off this other tank. That was so funny. Perfect Guy Gardner. And then even Metamorpho comes in and smashes this tank. So maybe Metamorpho is going to join the team? We'll have to wait and see, right? But Hawkgirl, on the other hand, goes hardcore after Boravia's leader. You can see him running away there, screaming, and then she flies him out the window. And yes, this is that same guy who's been a jerk the entire movie, right? And then he even says, well, you're not going to kill me. You're a hero. And she drops him. Oh my, really? Really? I was a little surprised by that. I mean, it was kind of funny because you didn't see it coming. And then you just were like, what just happened? The Justice Gang kills people for no reason? It'll be interesting to see whether this comes back around again. But anyway, back in Metropolis, things are going from bad to worse as the buildings are all collapsing. And notice, there's Luthor Corps. I mean, he doesn't seem to care about any of this destruction. Insane, right? But then Superman comes over and stops these buildings right before they fall. And he's like, please drive. I can't hold this much longer. And sure enough, it does eventually collapse. Crazy. And then Luthor just rips through the city. He's just not stopping. Oh, crazy. And then Mr. Terrific shows up and he's mad that Superman brought the dog, but hey, Krypto's going to come in handy big time. So now it's time for the big throwdown at the ballpark. You can obviously see Mr. Terrific is already wiped out, and these drones are really going to come into play in a minute, but we see the Engineer attacking Superman and Ultraman attacking Superman. Of course, it's the Meteor Stadium, sponsored by Lord Tech. Who else? So Ultraman goes after Superman, tries to take him down hardcore. I love this sucker punch he gives him. My goodness. And then Superman does a nice wrestling move on him, but it's the Engineer that does the really creepy move. Same thing she did to Krypto. She moves her nanotech all over his face and then ultimately into his lungs. I mean, I'll give James Gunn big time credit for making Superman so vulnerable in this movie. So Superman then zooms up into space and hurls back down towards the Earth and hits so hard that it knocks the Engineer out, and it also reveals Ultraman's identity. And yep, it's what most of us guessed, right? That he is a clone of Superman. But not just any clone, a really dumb one. At least that's how Lex describes him, because he basically has the mind of an idiot, and Lex has to control him, which is why he gives him all those fight moves. So Lex controls Ultraman, finally hoping to take Superman down and kill him. And you can see how excited he is as he's doing blow after blow after blow. But Superman figures out what to do. He has Krypto destroy the drones so that Lex can no longer control Ultraman. And now that allows Superman to take Ultraman off the map. Ouch, right in the head, right? And ultimately, he knocks Ultraman into this black hole and maybe kills him, or maybe he's going to end up coming back out again at some later time as Bizarro. In fact, this may end up creating the Bizarro world. Let me know your thoughts on that, but I think that would make a lot of sense. So now Lex plays his final hand. They say, Lex, the Raptors have arrived, and he says, kill him. And that's when Superman responds with, good luck with that. So now it's time to kick some Raptor butt. Basically, Krypto pulls off his helmet, and Superman socks him in the face. But oh my word, there are a ton of them up there. They're like just gnats in the sky. There's so many. But then Superman basically loads up and crushes them with his heat vision. Just utterly crushes them. Afterwards, he's entirely spent, and Mr. Terrific's like, hey, quit messing around. He's like, I'm not messing around. I'm doing important stuff, as he collapses for the minute. But the reason Mr. Terrific needs him is they've got to close the rift before it destroys the entire city. Lex, on the other hand, decides, scorched earth for Metropolis, and I'm heading out. He says, let's go. Now, his men are actually saying, well, let's close the rift. And he's like, no, they chose him. Let them die. Oh, my word. Dude is hardcore. And we actually see that even though his buildings are being destroyed, he actually has a getaway ship that was tucked in between them the whole time. Isn't that wild? It was right there before our eyes. Love it. Absolutely love it. But before he gets away, Superman catches up and gives him a little mini speech. They've always been wrong about me. I get scared, but that is being human, and that's my greatest strength. Something Lex will never understand. Lex, though, says, the government gave me the authority to kill you. If not today, then... But before he even gets to finish that sentence, in comes Krypto. And Krypto rocks him. I mean, absolutely rocks him. So when he gets back up, yeah, he is trashed, man. He is trashed. And Krypto has reason to be upset. He got kidnapped, right? He got kidnapped, so this is his revenge. Awesome. Okay, so now Lex is arrested and sent to prison. And in fact, we find out that they're going to send his bald head to Belle Reve. Yes, the same Belle Reve that we saw in Creature Commandos, and I bet we're going to see again in Peacemaker Season 2. So maybe Lex will make an appearance in Peacemaker Season 2. We'll have to wait and see. But anyway, Maxwell Lord finally makes an appearance and is so glad to see Lex gone. He says the one thing that liberals and conservatives can agree upon is that Lex Luthor sucks. Too funny. Too funny. Then all the prisoners are set free. Miss Tessmacher is set free. And that poor girlfriend, that ex-girlfriend of Lex's that he had kidnapped. And yes, even the monkeys are set free. And it looks like they're going to have some fun playing with Krypto. So maybe, just maybe, Metamorpho is going to join the Justice Gang. Because remember, he helped them over in Boravia. So Guy Gardner at first is like, nah, you're not joining the Justice Gang. But when Metamorpho says, Justice Gang, that's a cool name. Suddenly Guy's like, oh, you're in. You're in. I really, really liked Nathan Fillion in this movie. He was perfect as Guy Gardner. So then this was a great scene where Superman says, Miss Lane, I thought I could give you an interview. I could fill you in on all the behind the scenes. But as they take off, Perry White's got this suspicious look on his face. I think he knows what's going on, and I think he's probably figured out that Clark is Superman. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But anyway, this was a very romantic kiss, very touching, great way to end the film. Just in general, Superman and Lois and Clark and Lois were so great together. James Gunn did such a fantastic job casting the two of them together. And then we get an epic surprise guest in the fortress. Supergirl herself shows up. So the robots say, Sir, I think your cousin has returned. And she's like, where's my dog? Crypto is so happy to see her. So now we learn that, yes, Crypto is indeed her dog. And he pummels her. And she just laughs with joy. And Clark's like, okay, well, this is why he has behavioral issues. So funny. And then as she walks off, he explains that she likes to go and party on planets with red suns. Because of our metabolism, you can't get drunk on a planet with a yellow sun. So this was a fantastic intro to Supergirl, and the very next movie, in fact, is going to be Supergirl. Used to be called Woman of Tomorrow. He's eliminated the Woman of Tomorrow part, but Supergirl is looking like a fantastic movie at this point. And then supposedly it will also feature Lobo, with Jason Momoa, of all people, playing Lobo. Oh my word. This is going to be a fantastic movie. And then we get one of the most touching scenes of the movie where Superman's robots ask, would you like to see the footage of your parents? But instead of showing him footage of his Kryptonian parents, he gets footage of Ma and Pa Kent. So just a perfect way to end the film. As for the post-credit scenes, they're both pretty basic. The first one is a real nice shot of Superman and Krypto sitting on the moon looking down at the Earth. And the second one is Superman and Mr. Terrific surveying the damage and the repairs they've done to try to fix the damage and the cracks that still exist, obviously. And Superman's like, it's a little off, which absolutely ticks off Mr. Terrific. So James Gunn has said he's not going to use post-credit scenes to tease future DCU entries, but instead just to have nice little end caps on the movie. So there you go. That is my breakdown and review of the Superman movie. And in fact, let's do one last thing and change these descriptions to the days of the week when each scene occurred, because I love how Gunn handled the timeline management in this movie. It was impeccable. So let me know your thoughts. What did you think about the movie? I thought it was a fantastic way to kick off the new DCU, and I'm very, very happy with how it turned out. But let me know your thoughts in the comments, because you know I read and respond to everything. So don't forget about that July contest. Be a subscriber, leave a comment, win a book or a steelbook. And there's the membership option in case you're interested in that. And I always love to mention the Discord. Here we are in the DC section talking about, well, what else? Superman. So we'd love to have you join us. And I also promised I'd talk about the Doomsday Countdown Watch on the Discord. Every day listed here at 7 p.m. We'll watch a different movie or show as we prepare for the December 18th, 2026 release of Doomsday. So we have 2,200 members across the globe, conversations 24/7, and I'll leave a pinned comment so you can join. Also, if you don't mind, like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. You can check out more content, and we'll all eagerly await the next entry in the DCU.